So this is a project by Daniel Aviel, student ID 234411760. Um, my project, essentially, all it does is take a specific or random event chosen by the Ticketmaster API and then inserting it into a person's Google Calendar using the Google Calendar API. I'll give a quick demonstration of how it works right now. Um, um, Here you go. I am choosing a date and I'm choosing a state. I press submit. I log in to an account. And it redirects me to my Google Calendar where I find the event right here with its name and a link to the event and tells me where it is. The link is there just in case I'd like to purchase the tickets for the event. And it tells me here the date and the time of the event as well. The event is chosen by the Ticketmaster API. Well, so as I said before, the two APIs which are used are Ticketmaster API and the Google Calendar API. The Ticketmaster API, as we access it through here, is using this as the endpoint for. Oh no, this is not the one. I'm looking at the wrong one. Um, this is the endpoint, and in this endpoint we insert data such as the date that we want to put it in or that we want to look in, and the state in which we want to do it in, as well as an API key which we got from the from signing up with the event with the Ticketmaster API. The date and the state data we actually saved whenever we were in the main page of the um, of our website. As we can see it over here, we save it in state and we save it in date, whatever responses we got from the user. Whenever we go to the Google Calendar API, because it's an OAuth server, we need to do an authentication. So then we use two different access points or two different endpoints to send the request. One of them is the authentication, which we can see right here. We supply it our credentials such as the client ID, the redirect URL, which I'll show after, and the scope, which is the Google Calendar API, which I want to access. And once this is done and I get all the access information, the scope that I'm going to will be found right here, which is the Calendar API, where we supply data like the date that we want to do it in and the time, date time together, a summary of the event, which is basically whatever event we chose, the location, and the event link, all of which are going to be in the request body for the endpoint of the Google Calendar API. Well, the first one to be called in this app will be the Ticketmaster. The reason is that as soon as a person chooses his state and date, the request will be sent to the Ticketmaster API, where we will get a response which includes a list of different events, which we can see over here. An example I did in Insomnia, we get a list of events through the API in a form of a JSON file. And over here we have, for example, for this date, I had 3 different events, and we can access all kinds of information from there, and then we can use that information, send a call to the Google Calendar API, and then put that information that we chose in random and put it into the Google Calendar API. We can see all the different things that happen in a sequence diagram that I made for this project. It starts over here with the user. The user first makes a request for the root of our site, and for our site, the host is a local host 3000 because it's found on my local computer. Once the server receives this information, receives this get request, it will send the response with the code 200, which means okay, and it will also send the file index.html, which could be found right here, index.html. And this index.html contains a bunch of information, including a form which contains the date and the state, as well as all the choices of the states possible. Notice that the value over here will be the code for the state, which is what is asked by the Ticketmaster API. It does not want, when we send the GET request, it doesn't want the name of the state, it wants the code. So, going back to the sequence diagram, once the user fills out the form, which we could see over here, you see the date and the state, and then we can press submit. Once this is happening, the basically the user will send a um, get request to the server, where it will search for, well, it will put as parameters the date and the state code into the local host. This is the server. Now, once the local host gets this um, uh, request, it will send a GET request to the endpoint of Ticketmaster. Ticketmaster is our API. I already put here a bunch of details, so that is an example of what we're gonna do. The host is Ticketmaster API. We're gonna request for the discovery v2 events.json endpoint, and then we will put here in the query stuff like when is the start and end time, which are essentially going to be around the same date, the date that was put by the um, a user will be put into the start and date time, so it will look only for that specific day, because that's what the API allows us to do. It allows us to filter by the date and the time, and it also allows us to search for events by the state code. And then also we have to put the API key and say what the host is. I will give you an example of what exactly the API here wants. If we go to the Discovery API, it says that we have to search for things, and we can filter by different different queries. We have to put the API key, and then these are a bunch of different. I'll find it right. Oh, there we go. Here are different query parameters which we could put. So I could have filtered stuff by anything, but I chose start date and end date. So I will be able to filter things into the date that the user wanted. And I also used the state code, as seen over here, to send a request for only events in that state. Yeah, this is it. Now, once this GET request is sent to the Ticketmaster API, if the response is correct and everything is processed by the API of Ticketmaster, it will send us an OK. Assuming that everything is okay, it will send us a response with a header OK at 200, which means OK, and it will also send in the response body, it will send a JSON form with all kinds of information, which I've showed you before over here. There's a bunch of information about the events, and there's the name, the type of an event. They choose whatever event they want to put. That's including the URL of the event as well. Now, the job of my server is to choose randomly between the list of events, because the events are given over here as a list. There's a list of different events which could be chosen. You see, one event, second event, third event, and the API chooses a random event, and then it uses this choice to send it and saves all that information in a bunch of different variables that we need, and this will be used later on as the Google Calendar is already called, and that's actually the next step. So what our server does is it uses all the information it received from the JSON file, it saves it, and then it sends a temporary redirect request, request 302, and as the location, as the Google API request, for the location it uses there we go, I'll find it right now, the authorization. For the location, it uses the endpoint of what we want to do, and it also asks us to put a bunch of parameters in there that will tell us exactly what we're tell the Google server what we're looking for. These parameters include the client ID, include the redirect URL, and response type, which we usually say as code. For web server application, we say as code, and we put the scope. The scope would be the part of the Google API that we want to access, which is the Google Calendar API. This is what I would use after, and that's about everything that I put for the thing. As we can see over here, there's client ID, there's redirect URL, which would be our localhost / code. That's the endpoint that we will try to access later on after the user accepts all the forms. And the response type, as we said, is code, and the scope is the Google Calendar API. Now, once this request is sent, then there's going to be a GET request by the by our Chrome or whatever the user is using, and it will send a GET request for the OAuth access token. The host is going to be the Google authentication, and then it will pass into it a client ID that we already got from Google. By the way, all of this information is saved over here in the credentials form. So we have ticket client ID, ticket master client ID, Google client ID, a client secret for the Google API, the scope that we need for the Google API, and the redirect URL, which we will see how it comes up later when we look at the code. So once we send this GET request, we put a bunch of that information, which is the client ID for Google, the redirect URL, then and the scope. Also, we put the scope. Then the Google sends a OK response and gives a login form. The user will have to log in. It will put all his credentials, and once this is happening, if everything is okay, the server the Google server once again sends an OK response, at which point it asks if it wants to access the whatever, if it wants to give my app access to all the information. The user says yes, and then it will send the 302 temporary redirect with the location being the redirect URL that I specified before. It will also send us an authorization key and the scope that we need. So now, once the user will receive this, it will send the GET request to my server, where he will give me the authorization code that the Google sent, including the scope that we're going to have to use. And when my server gets it, it sends back to the Google API a post request. In that post request, it will say what the code is. It will say what the client ID is, what the code that we just received from Google after the user signed up. It will send a secret, which I showed I have over here, client secret. I got that by signing up to the Google API. The redirect URL one more time, and the grant type we say is the authorization code. All of this could be found again in the Google API over here. This is the stuff that we send, and then it will send all of that information over here. That is the response. Client ID, secret code, grant type, redirect URL. Okay, so once this is happening, if everything is okay and all the information lines up, the code is okay, the client ID is okay, the secret fits whatever our server requested from Google before, then Google sends an OK with a JSON file and this JSON file has an access token which we could use right now. This access token is a temporary key that the server can use, basically telling the Google API that I got all the information that we received, we synchronized all information, everything is okay. So now this access token could be used to send a post request, as said by Google. The post request is going to be this time to the Google Calendar API specifically. In the request, in the header, I will put the authorization, which contains the access token that we received from the Google Calendar API. The host for this one is the host for this one is the Google API. That's the wrong one. I need to change it. Start and in the request body we have the start time that we wanted. It will say in the calendar when it's going to happen. The end summary is going to be the name and the location. This request body will tell the Google Calendar API what is it needs to request. It needs to input into the new event that we are creating. Once this is done, it sends an OK response with another JSON, and this JSON contains a bunch of information about the event. Well, mostly the information that we put over here. I believe I have an example of it. Yeah, there we go. So this JSON contains what kind of event this is, an E tag, an ID. It has a link for the event, when it created, and stuff like that. A bunch of information that Google has. And over here, this is the body that we sent. It will have the start date, the end date, and stuff like this. It will be over here. Now, once the server receives this, basically knowing that everything is okay, Google inserted that event into their calendar, into the user's calendar. Now it sends a temporary redirect to the user to the Google Calendar, and then the user sends this GET request to the Google Calendar server, and then it says OK, and then it displays the Google Calendar, an example of which we can see over here. It shows us, like I showed before, where we are. So this is the sequence diagram. Now let's see the code itself. The code could be found over here. So first what we do is we require fs, which will allow us to create read streams and put that information into whatever files we need to send responses. The HTTP requirement will allow us to send requests, and the HTTPS will allow us to send requests, and the HTTP will allow us to create a server, and the URL is going to be used to parse the information that we receive from the Calendar API or the Ticketmaster API, as we will see after. Well, another thing that we have to require is credentials, because as I said before, we save a lot of the information that we need over here: the ticket client ID, the Ticketmaster client ID, the Google Calendar client ID, the secret, all the important information that we need. And we also have a lot of information that will be used after, information that we get from the event, Ticketmaster events. We will save it over here. We said that the port number for this, it shows 3000. The server, we will create it using HTTP create server. The server then will be saved into this constant, into this variable. And once this has happened, we start listening to it, and we put event listeners to it using the server.on, listeners for request and listeners for the event listening. And to each of those on, we will have event listeners, we will have event handlers. So the simpler one first is a listen handler. Once we start listening, the console there tells us that now we're listening on this port. And once we're starting to get requests, this request handler is going to use the code to tell the server what it needs to do. So first, we tell the server that we're gonna we got a request for whatever this is. In the parameter, we pass the request, and then we say that we want the URL. Now, if we see the URL is for the main page, for the root page, we say that we send, as we showed before in the diagram, we will send back a response saying everything is okay. We saw the content type that we will send to the user will be of type text or HTML, or will be of type HTML, and then we'll create a read stream of this index.html file, which contains information about how the page is going to look and the different forms and inputs that the user will input. And once we create this read stream, we will pipe it into the response that we will send to the user back. The server will send it to the user. Okay, so then after this happens, user receives this page, and it will start filling in information. And once it submits, as it shows here in the index.html, the form will go into search as a get method. And whatever parameters are going to be inside are going to be the input parameters of name date and of name state, as we can see over here. These are going to be the parameters. So let's go back to the code. Now this here specifies what we do if we get a request for the search. If the request that we receive starts with the word search, that means that we came back from the index.html file and we filled in the form. Once the server receives this type of request for a search, it will use the URL object, a new URL object, and use the method called search parameters or search params to take in the parameters of this of the request. It will save one of those parameters into a variable called state and another one into a variable called date. Now over here, now if the state or the date are of type null, there will be an error sent to the user and saying that there's missing input and something was not okay, if our server detected something is not okay. Now, if all parameters are okay, we start sending a get request. Get request to the Ticketmaster API. We use all the data that we got over here. As we can see, the endpoint is going to be the Ticketmaster API. I already put into the filters the start date time, the end date time, and I said the start code. I will put the state code. I will input the state and the API key. I already put all these parameters into the endpoint, and all that will have to be included are the names of the date and the state and the API key, which we required from the credentials. This will be used to make an HTTPS request, as you can see here, the endpoint. And as the responses are received, as we put a listener over here for the request, for this specific request, as the response is received, there will be a process stream function called, which takes as parameters the response that we got, the response. It will take as parameter a specific function called parse result, where we will parse the results, and the response we will pass it over here too, and then we'll say end, basically saying there are no more requests. The request is already done. Now let's go down. Once this is happening, we will go to process stream. What process stream is going to do, it will receive the response, it will save it into this variable called body, and then it will call some function callback, and in our case right now it will be the Ticketmaster parse results. What it will do, it will create a read stream of a certain result just in case that something goes wrong. So we'll save it over here for a second. We'll remember it in the back of our heads, or the server is going to remember it. And then we will take whatever response we got in the form of a JSON from Ticketmaster, and we'll save it into this variable called lookup. Then what we'll do, we'll save this lookup variable, and we'll traverse through the JSON file until we get to an object called events. Now, in case that this events file would be an array, as we said before that it is, as we can see in this JSON file, it was over here. It's an array, so we know that everything is fine, and we need to make sure that there are actually events in this array. We will generate a random, the server will generate a random number between 0 and whatever the number of events is. And then it will say that it will save the name of the event by traversing through the same JSON object. There's the name over here, and then it will have the event time. It will traverse through those, goes to start date time, and venue is going to get the name of the venue. City location is going to be saved as the city.name, this is where the venue is located. And there will be an event link saved as well. It will be saved over here. There will be a URL. If I get rid of the images over here, we'll be able to see it. There we go. There's the URL. Oh no, that's the URL for the images. Sales, dates, classifications, motor, seat map, venues. There's a URL. I didn't see it. Where the URL is going to be saved as well. Now, once we save all of this, we will go to another endpoint, which this time is going to be the Google API authorization, because we need to send the request for the authorization form for the user. And along with that, the server is gonna put the client ID, the redirect URL, and their scope. And then it will send a redirect 302 to that location that we saved over here. And just in case that this is not okay and we didn't get a proper response for the Google API, there will be some sort of error sent saying that the result that we saved over here, saying that there is no results. I actually have an example. I tried it one time over here, and it said that no results found. There's also going to be a try again button where you can go back, just in case it doesn't work. So that would be a 400 error. Now, in case it does go fine and then it goes and redirects, in that case, we're going to go back to here and it will redirect the once this user does everything and everything is done correctly, it will go into code. So if our server receives a request for code, what it will do, it will take the input and it will save it and take the and query it, say with the save it into response input, and then we save the code that the server will save the code that received and put it as parameters for the endpoint. It will also put the client ID and the the client secret from the credentials, and then it will send an HTTP request. The endpoint is saved over here, and then we also say that the method is going to be post. In the header, we say the contact type is going to be this, and the host is going to be whatever the Google host is. And whenever we get a response back, the server is going to process the stream again, and this time call the parse results for Google this time. And once this is done, it ends. Now, yeah, we already said that if something is not okay, there's going to be an error and say that whatever the user requested was not found. That's just in case. Now, going back over here to our functions, we will go to the parse results of Google, which is what the function that we called before. Um, this function takes it takes the response, and then what it says is that gets the access token from the JSON that we got, and it will get an options where it will access key will be used. The access keys that we got. This is the access token that we got from the Google server. Once we know that everything is okay, and in the request body there will be a start end time, and we will use the variables that we saw before, event time for a date, start and end time. This way that the Google API will know to put into the event the start and date will be, well, exactly in the event time that we wanted. Event chosen is the name of the event that was saved from the Ticketmaster API. Is going to go into summary. Summary for the Google API calendar will be where what the name of the event is. Location, we say that it's going to be into location. The Google API will save the name of the venue, and it will say that it's in the city called whatever city it is, because the city we got from the uh, API of Ticketmaster. And in the description, we will save a link for the event just in case the person would want to go there. And then we put all of that information into an HTTPS request. That's going to be the endpoint. And whatever response we receive, the server is going to process again as a JSON file, well, as a stream, and it will send it into that method called receive task response. And it will write uh, it will send all of that too. And if this is not okay, there's going to be an error type problem with authentication, and we know that something is not okay with the server. The user 502 is a code that I saw online for bad gateway. Something is wrong with the servers. The servers couldn't like connect with each other. Something the problem is with the server, not with the user. So it's a 502 error, and we'll tell the person that there is problems with authentication. But if everything is okay and we receive we use the access key that we received over here from Google, and we put all that information in, and all that information went through. We're gonna process all the stream. We're gonna receive it back into a receive task response. In which case, we will get a certain link, and this link is going to be saved into calendar link. And then, well, if the calendar link actually exists and there is some information in the JSON file that we received from Google, then we will say that we'll have a redirect from the server, and we'll redirect the person to a location, which is the calendar link that we received from the Google API. Just in case it's not okay, there's again going to be an error saying that the request is not okay. We catch all these mistakes that could happen. Yeah, that would be it with the code. Um, now, um, let's try to. Now, the way I made sure that this is going to be in sequence, that is, it's going to be a synchronous process, is basically, first of all, receiving all the information. Only once I receive all that information, as can be seen in this method in the parse results, and it is only after I get the response from Ticketmaster that I redirected the user into the Google API. So this way, it is assured that the two different APIs work one after the other and not at the same time. But the user is not actually used for this kind of stuff, so it's not that the user directs this by himself. Just in case, a lot of this information is saved over here um, into these variables. This could be accessed after. Um, so let's try to run this code one more time to see a bunch of different scenarios. Let's go over here. This is the root. If we try to put something that is not known, it will say that it's not found. If we are going to an event that does not exist, as I showed before, or and a date and state combination that doesn't exist, it will say that there were no results found. If everything is okay, um, say that the event is going to be on the 25th, and let's go to New York, because right after I'm done with the finals, maybe we're going to have an event. Submit that form, and once everything is done, because I already signed up, everything is fine. It gives me this random event, and if I want to, I can click on this link, go to Ticketmaster. That's already up to me. That that's not the job of the server to do that for them. All the server does is just put the event on the calendar. Um, yeah, that should be it.